Well, good morning, everyone. We are back to the study of the book Action and Reaction. Actually, we're going to share what we studied last month, because it's important to go over what we studied last month, because this study today is completely related to what we studied last month. So last month we studied the story of Ideu and Marcela, their marriage. It's called Interrupted Redemption. Ideu is an irresponsible father and husband that planned to kill his own wife. And in the beginning, we see them going there for the spiritual protection of Ideu's family to prevent the criminal outcome of his plan. And we see how the spirits, under the direction of Silas, act to prevent him going ahead with his plan. And then we discussed their marriage, Ideu and Marcela, and why in this case, when divorce becomes understandable between spouses, and this is a typical case because he's in a process of obsession, in love with another woman, and trying to get rid of his wife to end his marriage in a way that would allow him to be with his lover, but not lose the contact with his two daughters, which he loves very much. So we studied the history of Ideu's spiritual commitment with Marcela and their children, and we learned that their partnership is a case of atonement through marriage. And finally, analyzing the process of Ideu's failure in his spiritual commitments towards Marcela and their children. And we discussed how will Ideu be able to redeem his debts before his own conscience if his family forgives him and move on. So what happens to him if he cannot repay the debt directly to his family, what he would have to do, which means he would have to, he's responsible and he'll have to pay his debts towards someone else. So that was what we studied last month, and why I said it's important. Last month was really a chapter where we discussed their story. So it was a long chapter talking about their life. It's really a romance chapter. This month, the chapter that we are going to study, which is called, it's not this, sorry. Opportune Remarks. It's a theoretical chapter. There's no story. We're going to discuss events related to the chapter, the psychology, and we're going to talk a lot about theory. This chapter, it's very important, very deep. I hope we have time to finish, but if we don't, we finish next month, because there is a lot of very interesting subjects, especially related to sex and to gender and to relationships and all these topics. So I hope we can discuss a little bit of what's going on with this. It's all related to the case that we studied last month. Okay? Zoraida, can you read for us?
Yeah, yes, of course. Could you put the letters a little larger?
A little larger, the letters, okay.
A little bit larger.
Like this, better? More.
Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we begin. Opportune Remarks. Ideu's family problems offered us an opportunity for a valuable study of the pure terrain of the soul. For that reason, as we were heading back to Marcel with the assistant, we used the time to probe his clear and sensible thoughts on a number of important questions boiling in our minds. Hilario was the first to break the long pause. My dear Silas, isn't Roberto and Marcella's case a perfect example of the so-called Oedipus complex that Freudian psychologists hold to in child psychology? Our friend smiled and said, the great Australian doctor could have achieved significant advances in the realm of the mind if he had opened a door to the study of.
You can't reach the top.
To the study I could say, to the study of reincarnation. Unfortunately, he was concerned with scientific pragmatism and did not have the courage to go beyond the rigidly structured physiological field. Consequently, he remained stuck in the obscure regions of the unconscious, where the self stores its experiences, thereby turning its own impulses into automatic responses. As as mother and son, Marcella and Roberto couldn't hide the sympathies they brought with them from the past to the present. By the same token, Hildula and Sonia and Marcia couldn't escape the predilection that has linked them together since the past. The problem has to do with affinity in its essential structure affinity with debts demanding payment. I recall the excessive emphasis we can contribute to the theory of libido, the energy through which, according to the Freudian school, the sexual instinct is expressed in the mind. I made a few comments on the topic, focusing especially on child amnesia, which the famous scientist considered as being an utmost importance in explaining the workings of the unconscious. Silas helpfully finished without hesitation. Suffice it to say that in reincarnation, a spirit is using a physical body, and consequently, these amnesias are the natural result of the temporary inability between the soul and it is utilizing. During childhood, the ego is still in the process of materializing and will express reminiscences and opinions, sympathies and antagonisms through instinctive manifestations that give it a glimpse of the past, which it will barely remember in the near future, because it will begin to activate the it will it will activate the developing cerebral machine that will serve it only for a period of time and for specific reasons. The same occurs in old age when words seem to vanish from the frames of the memory, displaying alterations in the brain, which has been changed through wear and tear.
Thanks, Zoraida. So,
okay.
So here we start talking about, they start discussing the case of Roberto. Roberto is the son of Ildeu and Marcela. And we learned last month that they have a very close connection, and they were a couple in the past. And there was Marcela left Ildeu in the previous incarnation to be with Roberto, and that created the issue that was the rivalry between the two. So Ildeu shows very antagonistic behavior towards his son, and he threatens to kill his son in one of the discussions that we read in the last chapter, and at the same time we see Ildeu in love with his two daughters, which in previous life were his lovers, that he had affairs and abandoned, and but he's still in love with them. So Silas talks about, of course, the Freudian, right, psychology, the Oedipus complex, right, that we know from Freud. For those that study Joana de Angelis through the psychography of Divaldo Franco, the books of the psychological collection, Joana de Angelis is Freudian plus Jung, which Jung is already an evolution of Freud, because Freud stayed really in the physical aspect of our of the physical of the human body. Jung entered in a little bit into the spiritual aspect of it, right? The mind and everything, and Joanna de Angelis, of course, bring all the spiritist concepts on top of that, the reincarnation and all these issues that should as Silas says here, it should be addressed by Freud, and he because he focused only on the physical body and he tried to study in the brain and the reactions of the physical brain, the complexes that we have. He did a really good work in starting the whole psychological studies. Of course, we have a great debt of gratitude to Freud and his work, but if he had taken in consideration, of course, it would be very hard for him at that time. But Spiritism was already out there, and it was in France. There was at that time there was a Spiritist movement. Leon Denis was doing his work there, so he may had access to it. I don't know, but for some reason, one reason or the other, he decided to go ahead only with the physical body. So if he had opened the door to the study of reincarnation, he would have go much deeper in the Oedipus complex, right? So we see that Marcela and Roberto couldn't hide the attraction they had towards one another, and the Ildeu, Sonia, and Marcia also the attraction. But there, as Sila says here, the problem has to do with their affinity in its essential structure, right? Because their affinity comes with debts, demanding payment. So the case here is to sublimate love and not allow the love to become a physical interaction, which is the temptation there. Of course, Marcela, we see in the past chapter that she's already a more evolved spirit, so it will, and a mother-son relationship, most of the cases, they are able to sublimate the love. But in the case of Ildeu, Sonia, and Marcia, by what we read last week, we would have run the risk of becoming more than a love from father to daughters, and that would be the risk here, right? So the payment here is to sublimate the love that they have as parents and children, which is a challenge, but it is what we find every day around us, and the necessity of learning to love our children without possession, without jealousy, which is hard, meaning love them despite all the issues that they may have, and try to help and assist them is the responsibility of the parents, and responsibility of the children to love their parents despite of the issues that they may have than the differences. It's easier for parents towards children, more difficult for children towards parents, because they start living their own life, and parents can become a nuisance or a burden, and children may have more difficulty in dealing with parents. But again, it's a school of learning for all of us to how to deal with parents and children. So, and then Andre Luiz talks about the emphasis that Freud had on the theory of libido, right? Bringing the sexual instinct that is expressed in our mind. And he mentioned on a little bit on how children forget through forgetfulness of the past. And that Freud explains that it was important in explaining the works of the unconscious, Remember, Freud talks about this conscious, semi-conscious, and the unconscious, and all these instincts, sexual instincts, that the libido comes from the unconscious. And we know that a lot of comes from previous incarnations, but he didn't address that, right? So Silas mentions that in reincarnation, a spirit is using a physical body and consequently forgets about the past lives, but they are instinctively there. And but during childhood, the ego is still in the process of materializing and will express tendencies that it brings from previous incarnations, sympathies, opinions, and antagonisms. That we may get a glimpse of their tendencies and of their past through how the children act, and then that's where it comes, according to Spiritism, our responsibility of educating them until they reach 7 years, when they are more flexible. From 7 to the teenage years, they still are open to receive the influences, and then when they become teenagers, it's much harder, because then it's when the spirit completely takes over the physical body, and the spirit becomes completely united, and then all the tendencies that we bring from the past lives and that they were not addressed become part of the individual, and then it generates all the problems that we generally see in teenagers. Okay, so that was it. And then he mentions about the old age, right? The brain starts altering again through wear and tear, but it's a different story that we're not going to address here today. Okay. Elmo, anything to comment here? I think today is important too.
It's very straightforward.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions, comments? Okay. So let's continue.
Okay. Where were we again? I recall.
What about right below wear and tear?
Okay, now it was there. Okay, now I got it. What about the theory of libido as the sex drive characteristic in all living beings? I asked with curiosity. Freud considered Silas should be praised for the courage with which he embarked on the journey into the remotest labyrinths of the human soul in order to discover the wounds of our sentiments and diagnose them as accurately as possible. However, he cannot be completely approved of when he tries, more or less, to explain the human emotional feel through the absolute measure of erotic feelings. The assistant paused for a moment and continued. Creation, life, and sex are themes that interact in their essence, and they find their origins in the bosom of the divine wisdom. Hence, there is no way that we can standardize them with technical, unchangeable definitions. Consequently, we cannot limit human folly to the function of sex, which would be as restrictive as someone who tried to study the sun by only examining a beam of light filtered through a small hole in the ceiling. Examined as an active force of life in light of incessant creation, sex, strictly speaking, is expressed in all things, from the communion of subatomic principles to the attraction of heavenly bodies, thus manifesting the power of love generated by the infinite love of God. At the chemical level, the union between oxygen and hydrogen derives from this principle, forming the water that nourishes nature. The harmonious action of the sun, which stabilizes its family of worlds in the cerebral immensity and nourishes their existence, is a result of the same energy on the cosmic plane. Wouldn't the very influence of Christ, who let himself be crucified in his devotion to us, as wards on the earth in order to fertilize our minds with light for our divine resurrection, especially be the same principle applied at the highest level of sublimation? Thus, sex cannot be lacking in the spirit realm because it is of a mental substance that mentally determines the different ways in which it expresses itself. Sex is not an immutable energy of nature, which works upon the soul. Rather, it is a variable energy of the soul, with which it works upon nature, in which it develops, perfecting itself. So we could understand the energy as being a force of the creator within the creature, and that it is meant to expand itself through deeds of love and light that enrich life. But it is also subordinate to the law of responsibility that governs our destinies. Hilario had been closely following this explanation and considered. Such reasoning would suggest that the sexual force is not meant only to produce children. I thought this remark was completely out of place, taking into account the elevation of transcendence with which Silas had touched on the topic, but the assistant smiled benevolently and said, Hilario, my friend, on earth it is common to focus this important matter on the male and female genital equipment. However, we mustn't forget that we have stated that sex is a force of love at the foundations of life, encompassing the glory of creation. It was Sigmund Freud who defined the sex drive as a quest for pleasure. Yes, the concept is reasonable when applied to the primitive experiences of the spirit in the physical world. However, one must expand its definition in order to move it out of the erotic field to which it has been confined through the created energy of love, which ensures the stability of the whole universe. The soul, as it perfects itself, always searches for the noblest pleasures. Consequently, in accordance with the most sanctified stages of the spirit, there is the pleasure of helping, discovering, purifying, redeeming, illuminating, studying, learning, growing spiritually, constructing the infinite number of other pleasures. Thus, there are souls that love each other deeply, producing inestimable values for advancing the world, but never touching each other physically, even though they are constantly exchanging the quintessential rays of love for accomplishing the works they enjoy. Certainly, the honest home, the sanctuary in which life is manifested in the formation of bodies blessed for the experience of the souls, it is a venerable institution upon which divine providence focuses its attention. But besides the home, there are also associations of being that are bound to one another by the purest sentiments on behalf of the deeds of charity and education. The faculties of love give birth to sublime forms for the incarnation of souls on earth, but they also create the treasures of art, the riches of industry, the wonders of science, and the marvels of progress. No one garners the patrimonies of evolution by themselves. In every enterprise aimed at moral development, there are attuned spirits who seek one another in order to combine their individual abilities to accomplish the deeds that lift humankind from earth to heaven. After a short pause, he continued, in order to cement the foundations of his apostolate of redemption, Christ himself, our Lord, chose his disciples of the good tidings. Even though they failed to understand its sublimity at first, they became his courageous apostles, sealing with the unforgettable Master a heart-to-heart contract through which they set the foundations of God's kingdom on earth in an endeavor of selflessness and sacrifice, which to this day constitutes the most courageous deed of love the world has ever seen.
Thanks. So here starts with Andre Luiz asking about the theory of libido as the sex drive, right? And then Silas starts praising Freud with the courage to which he approached his journey, right? And investigating the remotest labyrinths of the human soul, and to study the feelings, the emotions, and in the end, he concluded that everything had to do with sex, right? But he cannot, as Silas said, he cannot be we cannot approve the complete theory because he explains the human emotional field through the erotic feelings, and that's not it, because as Silas explains here, sex is a much more ample concept that is the basic of all creation in the universe. So we need to remove the understanding of sex as a physical relationship between two human beings and expand it through the complete concept of creation that spirits, eternal spirits have, and extending it to all the functions that happen in the universe, right? So he says here, very interesting, that to limit human folly to the function of sex is to like studying the sun through a beam of light coming through a small hole in the ceiling, right? Because sex is an active force of life in light of incessant creation. It's expressed in all things, from the communion of subatomic principles to the attraction of the heavenly bodies, thus manifesting the power of love generated by the infinite love of God. So, for us that were raised with the word sex, meaning a physical relationship between human bodies, it's very difficult to immediately move away from it and expand this concept as in all things expressed from the, at the chemical level, the union between oxygen and hydrogen derives from attraction. And in the end, sex is also, when we think of sex between human beings, is attraction, right? So the law of attraction is applied with hydrogen and oxygen forming water, right? The action of the sun, the universe results of the same energy of the cosmic plane. And again, let's try very hard to remove the concept and the definition that we have of sex, since we understand the word, right? So he expands here in the influence of Christ, right? When he passed through earth, is the same principle applied to the highest level of sublimation. And then he says, so in the spiritual realm, sex cannot be lacking because it is of a mental substance and mentally determines different ways to express itself. And it is not an immutable energy of nature. It is a variable energy of the soul, which works upon nature and develops and perfecting itself. So he says here, we can understand this energy as being a force of the creator within the creature. All of us have this force, right? And it's meant to expand itself through deeds of love, the true love and light that enriches life, right? And then Hilario asks, well, so it doesn't mean also only that sex is to produce children. And Andre Luiz, very interesting, say, I thought his comment was completely out of place. But Silas says that on Earth it's common for us to focus on sex being a union mostly between male and female genital equipment. But he says, sex is a force of love and the foundations of life, right? That was Freud that defined sex drive as a quest for pleasure. And yes, this is a concept that is correct when applied to the primitive experiences of the spirit. But when we expand this definition to move out of the erotic field, it's the creative love and energy of love that ensures the stability of the whole universe. And as the soul, we are always searching for the noblest pleasures, right? Again, we have to move away from pleasures on the a physical level, but the spiritual pleasures of achieving the spiritual evolution. So he talks here about the pleasure of helping, discovering, purifying, redeeming, illuminating, studying, learning, growing spiritually, constructing, and other infinite number of other pleasures. And then he reminds us that there are souls that love each other deeply, but never touch each other physically. They are able to have true love for each other without resorting to physical interaction. They are exchanging these quintessential rays of love for accomplishing the works they enjoy. So for us to understand this, if you see a partnership that is producing between two spirits or two or more spirits that are producing results that are advancing humanity, enlightening humanity, this is the true connection, true love that two souls can share with, right? When we think about some examples that we have in humanity, and I think one example that we can all understand is Saint Francis of Assisi and Clare of Assisi, right? They had the perfect union through love for each other without ever coming into physical contact. Jesus and Mary Magdalene also. Jesus and his apostles, eventually, when they understood his mission, also. So we see the examples, right? Even between spirits, incarnate and discarnate spirits, like Divaldo and Joana de Angelis, like Chico and Emmanuel. This is perfect union through love, the pure love that unites two souls, that is driven by the sexual energy sublimated, right? We need to get used to this. These spirits like Chico or Divaldo, they sublimate the sexual energy into mediumship in their case. Mother Teresa into work and helping and being of service to others. So that's how these evolved spirits sublimate the sexual energy, the sexual desire into producing works for the benefit of humanity. So then he continues that, in an honest home, the sanctuary of which life is manifested, it is blessed. The physical union is blessed by divine providence, because that's how we connect to each other, to human beings, and in some cases we produce children, right? But besides the home, that are also associations of beings that are bound to one another by the purest sentiment on behalf of deeds of charity and education. So we need to more and more understand this energy, which is called the sexual energy, as something that goes way beyond the physical connection between two human beings. So in every enterprise aimed at moral development, there are attuned spirits who seek one another in order to combine their individual abilities to accomplish the deeds that lift humankind from earth to heaven. You see there the union between two individuals through love, pure love, without physical interactions. And then he talks about Jesus, the master, and his disciples, right? So you see here how we need to move away from from looking at the word sex as a dirty thing that we have been utilizing throughout the centuries, and with the guilty that the church brought to us, but to amplify the concept to pure love that may be manifested in a physical connection, yes, but it should go beyond that in everything that moves the universe forward. Okay? Elmo, anything to add here?
No, I think it's important to expand the definition of sex beyond the physical understanding love as an energy of creation, and sex being a tool that is used to utilize that energy for creation. Now, that creation may be in many forms, and one of them is to create offsprings, perpetuate the species, even going beyond only the human, go to cockroaches and sardines and everything else. But even going beyond that, being now here, I question if sex is cause or effect of the force of attraction and the force of fusion. But in either way, sex utilizes this energy called love for creation. And I can imagine here two composers work together to compose music. If it's a sexual activity of them without physical contact. I question if in a symphony orchestra, 170 people together producing song, if there's a sexual relationship amongst each one of them, of sharing the notes of the instrument that they play to create something wonderful, if that could be considered a sexual activity, of course, without any physical contact.
Yeah, the concept here is that yes, everything, every creation, it's originated by sexual energies, right? Which generates the pure love. If you think of an orchestra, each member has a profound love for music and for profound love for, well, the instrument that they play, and the union between all of them and the love that they have for the music unites. This energy unites and creates the beautiful music that we listen to, right? Again, I know that to use the word sex associated to all of this, we have a natural barrier against it, right? Because it may sound uncomfortable for us to think of that as sexual energy, but in this definition that Silas gives to us here, everything, yes, in the universe originates from attraction, and so what he calls here the sex is the attraction, right? So a musician has an attraction for music, so that's how he defines as sexual energy this, right? But it's I understand that it's not very logical for us, and it may be a little bit uncomfortable for us to associate sex with everything. But we need to try to move away from the concept of sex being just physical attraction, and the sublimation of the pure energies that we all have within us, coming from God, and the use of these energies, sexual energies, to produce something uh, of uh, of good to for humanity, right? From the primitive one, which is the sexual relationships, to the most sublime one, which is to help humanity evolve through a noble work. Okay. Any questions here, comments?
Yeah, just keep in mind that we are here talking about spirituality or expanding those definitions to a very transcendent way. So my point is, in studies of biology, don't get things mixed up. In biology, sex is what it is. It's something physical. But here we are not talking about biology. No, we're expanding this study beyond all fields of science, or if you put better, combining all fields of science, including spiritism.
Spirituality, yes. Yeah, good point. And again, when we talk about love, for instance, right? That in Greek there are 7 different words for love. Maybe we should have 7 different words for sex. Yeah, maybe. Maybe we'll have one day, or maybe we will be able to understand it as the whole concept that Silas is trying to explain here to us. Okay, Soraya.
Okay. At this point of his caring explanation, the assistant became silent for a while. However, realizing we would like to hear more from him on the matter of sex as humans perceive it, so that we can reach adequate conclusions for our studies of cause and effect, he began once again. Our comments on such an extensive theme arise from the highest angle that our mind can grasp, but that does not exempt us from the duty of emphasizing the fact that people's emotional experiences need to be sublimated. Analyzing this in its essence, we know that sex is the sum of the masculine or feminine traits that characterize the mind, which is why it is crucial to look at it from a spiritual point of view, picturing it in the spheres of the divine concessions that we must utilize respectfully and beneficially in the production of the good. I know that you would like to make a longer instructive foray into the subject, but we don't feel that we need to go into any more detail, because you know very well that the more discernment the spirit has, the more crucial are its obligations in life. Sex in the human body is like an altar of pure love that we mustn't relegate to filthiness or subject to committing the most frightful mental cruelties, whose consequences inevitably follow us beyond the grave. My colleague was anxious to ask more questions and continues respectfully. Silas, my friend, in the material world, we witness all sorts of sentimental conflicts that sometimes culminate in horrible criminality. Men who refuse to honor their sacred commitments to the home, women who forsake their ennobling duties toward their family, parents who abandon their children, mothers who either reject unwanted babies or murder them like cowards. All this because of their thirst for sexual pleasure, which in very often puts them on the dark pathway of crime. Do all these wrongs follow the spirit beyond the armor of flesh that death destroys? Why wouldn't they? The assistant answered sadly. Each conscience is a creation of God, and each existence is a sacred link in the stream of life where God is present and manifests himself. We will have to answer for all the harmful blows we have delivered in the hearts of others, and we will not allow ourselves to rest until we have bravely finished our work of readjustment. Impressed, my colleague persisted. Let us say that a man has seduced a girl for the sheer pleasure of it, promising her an honest marriage only to wantonly abandon her to her own despair after having satisfied his desires. The poor, distraught creature has no means for finding honest work and succumbs to prostitution. Is the man responsible for the madness his forlorn partner commits, since he wasn't the only one who indulged in the wrongdoing in the first place? One must realize that we will all answer for our deeds, explained the assistant. But in your example, even if the man isn't responsible for the wrongs the unfortunate woman will succumb to, he is undeniably the author of her misery. Upon discarnating with the remorse of his betrayal, the more he comes to understand the implications of what he did, the more intense his feelings of guilt will be. Of course, he will work to pull her from the abyss she fell into for having trusted him, and he will accompany her in reincarnation, accepting her as his wife or daughter in order to give her the pure love he had promised as he endeavors to regenerate her disturbed mind and to redeem his guilt-darkened conscience. Along the same lines, added Hilario, we see in men earthly society who has been ruined by disloyal women who drove them into crime and vice. The process of reparation is exactly the same. Upon awakening to the light of the good, the woman who had led her companion into the darkness of evil will now rest until he has been restored to moral dignity before the laws of God. How many mothers evolve through suffering and self-denial by dying each and every day amid affliction and sacrifice as they care for the monstrous children who torture them in body and soul. Behind many of these horrendous moving circumstances hides a divine endeavor of regeneration, which only time and pain can accomplish. All this, my friend, said Hilario, clearly sorrowful, forces us to realize that in the flaws of the genetic field, we must consider above all the mental cruelty we practice in the name of love. That's right, confirmed the assistant. We are in pursuit of pleasures. We usually set the worst traps for the imprudent hearts who listen to us. However, in breaking our word or our promises and vows, we disregard the law of correspondence, which returns to us in full all the evils we have committed, amid which the blessings of higher understanding increase our misery, because in the splendor of spiritual light, we cannot forgive ourselves for the stains and wounds in our own soul, let alone passion-related crimes we perpetrated on human society every day through abuses of the sexual faculties, designed to create families, education, beneficence, art, and beauty. These abuses cause not only long, torturous stays in the infernal regions, but also the disease and deformities that darken earthly life, because sex criminals who committed homicide or infanticide or caused madness, suicide, bankruptcy, and the destruction of others return to the flesh under the impact of disestablishing vibrations they set in motion against themselves. Very often they are the victims of congenital deformity, mental alienation, paralysis, early senility, obsessions, childhood cancer, various types of nervous disorders, untreatable pathogenic processes, and a whole array of ills deriving from paraspiritual trauma, which causes maladjustments in the subtle fabric of the soul, and thus requires a long and complicated endeavor of reparation in the forms of anxiety, anguish, disease, hardship, misfortune, mental impairment, suffering, and misery. Moreover, almost 20 centuries ago, long before the terminological pomp of modern psychoanalytical schools, which promulgate rash conjectures about mental diseases, Jesus taught that those who do evil become slaves of evil. And we can add that in order to cleanse the evil that has enslaved us, it is absolutely necessary to endure the purgation that roots it out.
Okay, thanks. So here we move into the physical relationships, right? Back into the physical relationships between two human beings. And then Silas tells us that sex is the sum of the masculine and feminine traits that characterize the mind. So that's why it's important to look at it from the spiritual point of view, that we must use it respectively and beneficially. But and then he concludes, sex is the human body is like an author of pure love that we mustn't relegate to filthiness and subject to committing the most frightful mental cruelties, that because the consequences will follow us beyond the grave. And then Hilario asks that we see all these crimes that are committed, right? That men that refuse to honor their sacred commitments to home, women who abandon the children, reject babies, and all these things. And he asks if all these wrongs follow the spirit beyond the physical body, right? And of course, Silas answers, why wouldn't they? We have to answer for all the harmful blows we have delivered to others. And we will not allow ourselves to rest. It's important here, right? It's not punishment from God. It's just the natural law imprinted in our conscience that eventually will come to our minds, and we will not allow ourselves to rest until we have bravely finished our work of readjustment, cause and consequence. All the acts and the harms that we have caused to others, eventually we will have to face the consequence. And going back to the case of Ildeo that we studied last month, and the consequences of his actions towards his wife and children in this incarnation are going to have consequences for him in future reincarnations, even if if Marcel and the children move on, he will have to face the consequences and make amendments, maybe towards others, right? So then Hilario gives an example: a girl that is seduced by a man that abandons her, and then she falls into prostitution, and he asks, is the man responsible for her, for everything that happened to her after? Is he responsible because all the actions that she took after she went into these other aspects of her life is not his responsibility, it's hers. But he says, even if the man isn't responsible for the wrongs, he's the author of her misery. So he will have to face the consequences of his action. So upon this carnation, he is going to have to rescue her. And ways of rescuing her is reincarnating with her as his wife or daughter. And if it takes too long for him to recognize and try and repair and look for reparation, and she moves on with her evolution faster than him, he will have to rescue someone else in a similar situation. Again, it's not an eye for an eye, which is very important. We have to pay our debts through pain or through love, but not necessarily to the individuals, the spirits that we cause the harm, because sometimes they move faster than we do, and we stay behind, and we have to make reparations. And the reparations is for our own self. So it doesn't matter to whom we are making the reparations. We have to do the reparations. And then Hilario continues on the other, the other way around. Women that drove men to crime and vice, and he gives a very good example here, right? They come back as mothers of very difficult spirits that make them die each and every day amid affliction and sacrifice, as they care for monstrous children who torture them in body and soul. Those very difficult children that cause all sorts of suffering for parents or for mothers specifically, right? So behind many of these horrendous moving circumstances hides the divine endeavor of regeneration. So Hilario talks about the realization in the genetic field that we have to consider all mental cruelty we practice in name of love. And Sila says that in our pursuit of pleasures, we usually set the worst traps for the imprudent hearts who listens to us. And, we have to face the consequences because we cannot forgive ourselves. And eventually, these abuses, they cause us to stay in long, torturous stays in the infernal regions, which are below the lower zones. But also, diseases and deformities in new incarnations, because sex criminals that cause destruction through all forms of ways to others return to the flesh under the impact of the destabilizing vibrations they set in motion against themselves. So very often, the consequences are congenital deformity, mental alienations, mental diseases, right? Paralysis, obsessions, and all types of nervous disorders, untreatable pathogenic processes, and many other ills deriving from the spiritual trauma, because we harm our spiritual body, our perispirit, that will cause these maladjustments in the fabric of the new physical body, and will come in the form of anxiety, anguish, disease, hardship, misfortune, mental impairment, misery, suffering, all types of suffering. And then he concludes by saying, Jesus taught us, those who do evil become slaves of evil. This can be found in John 8:34, right? We can add that in order to cleanse the evil that has enslaved us, it is absolutely necessary to endure the purgation that roots it out. Okay, this part was very related to the physical aspect of sex and the consequences of misaligned use of sex during our physical incarnation. Okay, Elmo, something here?
No, João.
All right. Okay, now some of the distortions that we have as consequences of our past problems. You can continue, Soraya.
Okay. The conversation seemed about to end, but still interested in settling some of the issues that were burning in his mind, Hilario asked directly, "What about the worrying problem of inversion?" Silas promptly replied, That won't take long to explain, considering that in essence, sex is the sum of the passive and positive qualities of the person's mental field. It is natural for the predominantly female spirit to linger for centuries on the evolutionary pathway as woman. Likewise, the predominantly male spirit will tally for a long time in the experiences of man. However, on many occasions, when the man tyrannizes the woman, denying her rights and committing abuses in the name of his supposed superiority, he distorts himself in the point that, unconscious and imbalanced, he is led by the agents of the divine law to a pain-filled reincarnation in a woman's body, so that in extreme inner discomfort, he may learn to venerate woman as his sister and companion, daughter and mother before God. The same applies to the offensive woman who, after dragging the man into lust and criminality, creates for herself a terrible mental alienation that she takes with her after the grave, thereby requiring interment in a man's body so that, in the webs of her unhappy emotions, she may construct within her the respect she owes to man before the Lord. However, in this explanation, we do not include the great hearts and beautiful characters that, in many circumstances, reincarnate in bodies that do not correspond to their most recondite sentiments. This is a circumstance that they themselves requested for the purpose of working more surely, not only for their moral development, but also for the carrying out for the specialized tasks through arduous learning experiences filled with loneliness on behalf of society, which accelerates his understanding of life and spiritual progress through their constructive renunciation. Silas had answered our questions brilliantly. In just a few words, he had condensed a luminous synthesis of a vast topic that we realized would certainly require several books to be duly analyzed. However, as if he didn't want to leave any stone unturned, my colleague went further. Since we have been dwelling on the topic of sexuality in connection with the law of cause and effect, how are we to interpret the attitude of honest and respectful couples who do not want to have children and thus regularly use contraceptives. Sila smiled in a strange way and said, even if they do not yield to the crime of abortion, in most cases they are unprepared workers who prefer to avoid sweat in their quest for immediate comfort. Unfortunately, they are only postponing sublime accomplishments to which they will unavoidably have to return because there are tasks and struggles in the family life that represent the unavoidable price of our regeneration. They enjoy life, trying unsuccessfully to deceive themselves. However, time inexorably waits for them, making them aware that redemption demands our utmost effort, refusing to accept the children that are almost always planned for them before reincarnation. They get entangled in the futility and preconceptions of the subper experiences, only to wake up after the grave feeling coldness in their hearts.
So here, it's a very interesting point that Hilario asks, right? The problem of inversion, meaning those that are born in the physical body that does not align with their feelings and minds and sentiments, right? You are born in a man's body, but you feel like a woman. You are born in a woman's body, but you feel like a man, which is a problem that we see a lot nowadays. It's a lot on the discussions that we see on transgender, on homosexuality, and things like that, right? And Silas explains to us here that sex is the sum of passive and positive qualities of the person's mental field. So normally we reincarnate for several centuries in the same gender, female reincarnating as a woman, male reincarnating as a man. And because to reach the level of a perfect spirit, we have to have experiences in both fields. The natural change between genders is a natural process that doesn't carry any problems in general, right? Because as we change genders, but we are not carrying traumas or anything like that, we do a natural transition. It's not that every time we change gender, we are going to face the challenge of not feeling adapted to the physical body. In most in normal cases of the evolutionary path, we will adapt to the new physical body we have and new gender without a problem. However, in many occasions, when we abuse the gender that we have, using it to abuse the other gender, we can, here as they say, unconscious and imbalanced, be led by the agents of the divine law to a pain-filled reincarnation in a different body, and then we'll find ourselves in extreme inner discomfort. We are talking about individuals that are born in a gender and they feel like the other gender. We're not talking about individuals that are comfortable in their gender but have attraction for the same gender. That's a different story. We're talking about individuals that are completely uncomfortable in the physical body they have, which are the cases of the transgender we see out there, right? We are given the opportunity to be born in this different gender, to learn to love and respect the gender we abused in previous incarnations. So we're going to have to live in this inner discomfort. So he talks about both cases, right? A man and woman. But then he talks about something that goes beyond that, right? We cannot include the great hearts and beautiful characters that in many circumstances reincarnate in bodies that do not correspond to their most recondite sentiments. Is a circumstance that they themselves requested for the purpose of working more surely, not only for the moral development, but also for carrying out specialized tasks. You may ask, can we give examples of this? Yes, we have these mediums that work their whole life with mediumship, do not form families, families in the physical world. So you look at them and you may feel that they are not, they are beyond male or female, how they present themselves. They present themselves like a mixture of male and female, because they are more evolved spirits that combine those qualities of male and female, and they use their sexual energies to sublimating them and use for, in this case, mediumship, right, to produce the mediumistic works. So there are those cases that they choose a physical body that is not, it's not what it's specifically what they are living through in order to perform a task. Maybe, through their physical body, they will avoid interacting with other human beings in terms of physical interaction, and the physical body they have will prevent them from being tempted or engaged in these physical interactions. We're not talking here about forced abstinence that we find in the churches. Everything that is forced creates problems, because when you force something, you go against your will and you can fall into temptations. And that's why we see so many problems in the Catholic Church with the priests and nuns that go into forced abstinence. Not all of them are forced. Some of them have the ability to live with it without any issues, but many of them fall into temptations and end up compromising themselves with physical interactions that will carry guilt and will carry all the consequences. And then Hilario asks about couples that decide not to have children and use contraceptives. And again, he talks about honest and respectable couples, right? Not disturbed couples. So couples that consciously and with honesty, without causing any harm to any children, that not using it abortion, but just using natural methods of prevention, anticonceptionals. And what Sila says that, unfortunately, they are postponing the responsibility that they bring from the spiritual world, which is to have a family and receive spirits that they need to readjust. So they are postponing, which is the same thing that we spoke last month about the divorce. A couple that divorced before they were supposed to end their relationship, or they fulfill their karma. They are just postponing it for next incarnation to having to readjust. And the same thing with those that decide not to have children. They are postponing their obligations. They will have to face the challenge of receiving and helping and assisting those that were supposed to be their sons and daughters, again, directly with them or indirectly, if they were supposed to have a son and they refuse, and this spirit may be reincarnated in another family and continue his journey, on another family and may no longer need this couple that were supposed to be his parents, but the parents will still have the responsibility of receiving a child in a similar case of readjustment to help someone else in the case, right? So what they are doing here, they are refusing to accept what they promised before reincarnation, and they get lost in the futilities and preconceptions of subpar experiences. And then when they wake up in the spiritual world, they'll feel the coldness in their hearts and the responsibility that they avoid, like all other responsibilities that we are supposed to face in our incarnation. And again, we are imperfect spirits. We're going to fail in many aspects of our lives and carry with us back to the spiritual world the consequences of these failures. And this is just one example of one of the failures that we can carry with us to the spiritual world. Doesn't mean that all couples that get together have to have children. Each case is a case. He's talking here about examples of couples that had the compromise, had the commitment of having children, and come to the physical world and avoid having children. That's what he's talking about. Okay, Elmo, any comments here?
Yeah, with the issue of the spirits reincarnate with the responsibility of adjustment and feel that they are born in the wrong gender, that would be a transgender. I wonder if there is a gradation of this discomfort, probably related with the degree of responsibility or karma from what they have done in the past, that create these gradations, a differentiation of sexual interest. And that include homosexuality or asexuality, someone who just don't care about, someone who is attracted by the same sex to the highest level in this gradation that leads to this transgender feeling. But of course, I'm here questioning, I'm not saying that is the case.
Yeah. Of course, each case is a case, each gradation, according to their responsibilities, it's different, right? And we are talking here, we have to be very careful, because when we talk about pure love goes beyond gender, right? In case of transgender, we are talking about those that are extremely uncomfortable with their physical body, right? And how it manifests, it can be in multiple different ways, right? Because there are many of those that are attracted by the same sex that are very comfortable in their physical body. It's just a matter of pure love, right? And their attraction is for the same gender. That's not it doesn't create an issue. I think that the karma is much it's a different type of karma, right? Maybe it's a karma of being discriminatory in the past, that you need to come into an incarnation where you are going to be discriminated against, so you can learn not to discriminate. And it can be a various number of cases, but yeah, I think here mostly they are focusing on the transgender, right, which is the extremely uncomfortable with your own physical body, and you're feeling that you are not the gender you were born into. Okay. All right. The last part,
Okay.
we're talking about abortion.
Okay. What about abortion assistant? Asks Hilario, extremely interested. Considering the way you have alluded to the matter, we must assume that it is a serious wrong. A serious wrong? It would be more appropriate to call it a dolorous crime. To snatch a child from the maternal womb is a confessed infanticide. The woman who commits or whitewashes such a crime is constrained by irrevocable laws to suffer dreadful anomalies in the reproductive center of her soul's perispiritual envelope. She predisposes herself to dolorous infirmities such as metritis, vaginismus, metrialgia, uterine infraction, and uterine cancer, from which she will very often discarnate, thus returning to the spirit plane to answer for her crime before divine justice. She will find herself still alive, but sick and wrenched, because through the continuous remorseful mental rehashing of her abominable crime, she will suffer the degeneration of her genital forces for a long time to come. And how can she recover from such a lamentable situation? The assistant thought it over for a few seconds and added, try to imagine a mutilated or deformed mole on a potter's table. Of course, the potter won't use it to make an expensive vase, but might use it for the second and third rate productions. The woman who willfully corrupted her reproductive center will, in the future, receive souls who have damaged their human shape, and she will be the mother of reincarnating criminals and suicides, regenerating the subtle energies of her perispirit thought through the ennobling sacrifice for her tortured, unfortunate children, learning to pray, to serve worthily, and to mentalize a pure and healthy maternity, which she will regain at the cost of suffering and of right work. Curiously, Hilario had nothing more to say. Considering the logic of Sila's remarks, I didn't have the courage to continue acting either. I was afraid of delving too deeply into an area where I might end up uncovering my own wrongs, and so I chose to keep my silence in order to think and relearn.
Okay. So, this very complex subject of abortion, right, that we talk about. Spiritism talks about abortion in terms of causes and consequences, not as something that is a sin or is condemned. It's just when you practice an abortion, you create the consequences that we see here, right? Spiritism calls it a crime, is the same thing as killing another individual. It's infanticide, as Silas describes here, right? But what he is interested here is in explaining the consequences of abortion, right? We have a free will, we make our own choices, and we make mistakes in our lives. And when we talk about abortion, it's a very delicate subject, especially in this country where it is legal, or in most developed countries it's legal, right? It creates consequences according to the divine law, right? To prevent an opportunity for a spirit to reincarnate, we create a series of consequences. Here, it doesn't talk about the consequences of creating an enemy by denying an opportunity for a spirit to reincarnate that may create obsessions and other consequences. Here he talks about the consequences for the woman that practices the abortion, right? So she predisposed herself to some infirmities that he describes here. She may discarnate, which happens sometimes, especially those that practice illegal in illegal ways that may cause them to end up dying as a consequence of the abortion. And then they find themselves in the spiritual world, but sick and wretched because they're meant remorseful feelings, right? And we see many women that practice abortion here consciously and willing to it. They carry throughout their life the guilty feelings of the one that they they didn't give the opportunity to reincarnate, right? And so, and how to recover from such situation, Silas explains that they will in the future, they will receive souls who have damaged their human shape, or will be the mother of reincarnating criminals and suicides, learning through the sacrifice for them, for these unfortunate children. They learn how to pray, to serve worthily, and to mentalize and pure and healthy maternity. Also, they may have difficulties in procreating, right? You'll find couples that have trouble having children and end up having, to choose adoption or other ways, and they will receive difficult children many times for them to learn as consequences of their actions. It's a very complex case. Of course, we cannot discuss it in 5 minutes. Here, what Silas is trying to educate us is the consequences of for the woman in practicing abortion. Of course, the men that are part of this process are going to be responsible also. Like we said, we study here in previously men that causes women to deviate themselves will have responsibility. Men that force women to have abortion, which is something that we see also, then the most of the responsibility, or almost all the responsibility, will fall into the man, not into the woman, because if she's forced to have an abortion against her will, is not her responsibility, is the responsibility of those who forced her to have the abortion, the man, in the case. Okay, Elmo, you have something here to add? Maybe you can talk a little bit about the diseases they describe, not technically, but a lot of names here that we don't know exactly what it is.
There is an explanation at the bottom of which one of those names means, right? I don't think there is.
Metritis is inflammation of the uterus. Vaginismus is painful spasm of the vagina due to involuntary contraction of the vaginal musculature, usually severe enough to prevent intercourse. And metralgia is pain in the uterus. Anything else?
No, the only thing that I was going to say is the responsibility of the man who perhaps impregnated those women and forced them to abortion, or even fathers or brothers of this woman that force women into those activities, if even against the woman's will. They are deeply responsible as well.
Yeah. Okay. Any final comments, questions?
I have a comment and a question.
Sure.
I believe it's the book Liberation. I could be wrong, but
Yes.
I think I read in that book that practitioners of abortions also face consequences as well.
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that. My question is, from that last paragraph with the consequences, it seems to me that women may have to undergo consequences times 2. For example, if you commit an abortion and you suffer the repercussions, the consequences in the current life, for example, fibromyalgia, uterine cancers, things like that before you die, do you have to face the consequences again when you reincarnate?
Not necessarily, right? If you went, the thing is, what have you learned from it, right?
Okay.
So if you face all these consequences with anger, revolt, and maybe increase your pain by self-sabotaging, things like that, then you still have to face the consequence, right? But if you learn through the experiences, so the suffering allows you to grow spiritually, to sincerely regret what you have done. You pray for that spirit that you gave you prevent the opportunity of reincarnating. So you can make the reparation through love in the same incarnation. But normally, this type of a spirit will choose then to receive a troubling spirit because they feel the obligation to help spirit in need, not because they still need, but because of their spiritual evolution, they will find the necessity to do the work because they feel as their responsibility. But yes, you can repair in the same incarnation. All things all mistakes we make, we can repair in the same incarnation, right? And not carry it back to the spiritual world. Everything is in our conscience, right? When we sincerely make the reparations on our issues, we can go back to the spiritual world with no karma for it. Okay.
Thank you.
Just one comment regarding that, Ron.
Yes.
It's just to be careful and we say over here, avoid the judgment because of these pathologies that Andre Luiz mentioned and that Ebony's mentioned are not necessarily results of abortions, okay? Could be for any other reasons. As we believe over here, all pathology has at the end a spiritual cause, but not necessarily because of abortion. So you're not going to make that assumption or presumption that the woman suffering for this or that pathology is because of abortions. And two, as Paul of Tarsus says, love covers a multitude of errors. The law is corrective, not punitive. If you made the corrections, if you learn the lessons, you don't need to go to any punishment because the law is not meant to punish anyone.
Thanks. Okay, 12:30. We did just in time. Okay, so next Sunday is the second Sunday of the month. We finish the book Jesus in Our Home. So we are going to talk about the gospel, right, Elmo, in some form. Gospel according to Spiritism, some form, maybe. Okay, we'll see what we're going to study in the gospel. Maybe a specific subject or talk a little bit about some items. We'll talk about it. We'll see. Okay. We will be open tomorrow, right? The weather has behaved well here in New York City, so we shouldn't have a problem for tomorrow for our center, right? I know that some places have received some snow today, but not here. So we are open tomorrow. Okay. Carol, can you do our final prayer?
Yes, thank you so much, John, for hosting, and thank you, Elmo, for your comments. Also, Sarita, thank you very much for reading for us today, and all who are here and participating. Infinite Creator and Supreme Intelligence, we give thanks to be together again for our studies of the book Action and Reaction. Our chapter is chapter 15, Opportune Remarks. To sublimate love as parents, they can assist their children to develop despite past life tendencies and afflictions. This needs to be re-educated. The egos of children are still developing and their sexuality and love are expanding. Souls are learning from family bonds through love, emotions, sexuality, and moral development. Love, attraction, and sexuality are parts of the universal concepts and the expanded force of the Creator. It's not just human interactions to be considered. By way of pure love, Highly evolved souls are able to sublimate their sexual energy to create, express, and manifest the positive motions and the expansion of the entire universe. In normal reincarnation processes, there are natural processes of gender and selecting perhaps an androgynous body to carry out specific tasks. This is an evolutionary process as well, and it may have impacting results for a person who is incarnating. There can be cause and consequence also due to abortion, which is a very complex issue. We give thanks to the spiritual benefactors and the good spirits for guiding and inspiring us today. May we receive the love, light, and peace of Christ within us and for our teachers, our directors, our counselors, the mediums, the workers, and all participants. We pray now and especially for world peace. We need inner peace as well to help create world peace. And we also pray for those who are suffering in the physical and spiritual worlds. We pray for our center, SGNY, and all spiritual centers throughout the world, that they may grow, prosper, expand, and be protected throughout the day and throughout the night. As we close, we humbly ask for safety and protection as we return to our family, our friends, our loved ones, and our co-workers. May we go forth now and remind ourselves to be beacons of love, of light, of peace, of service, and charity, which is love in action. May peace and love prevail. So be it.